Now, in addition to the nucleus and the components of the endomembrane system, like the ER and the Golgi, there are several other organelles that exist in animal cells as well. The next one that we're going to discuss is something called the lysosome. And so lys means kill. And so the function of the lysosomes is actually to kill macromolecules or to break them down into smaller pieces so that they can be recycled. And so lysosomes act as sort of this like garbage disposal or this trash bin for the cell. And they're an extension of the Golgi. And what's nice about lysosomes is that they can take worn out parts of the cell, break them down, and then recycle all of those pieces to form new parts. And they can also take in stuff from the outside that's like a big molecule and digest it into smaller pieces. And so when we talked about macromolecules, we talked about polymers and monomers. And what lysosomes will really do is take a macromolecule or a polymer and break it down into its subunits or its monomers. And then those monomers can be reformed and reused by the cell to do something else, right? And so it might take a protein, break it down into amino acids, and then those amino acids can go and do other things. Or it might take a complex carbohydrate and break it down into glucose, and then the cell can use that glucose for energy. And lysosomes, importantly, like I said, can take in things from the inside of the cell as well as from the outside of the cell, and they digest them both equally well. Okay. And the next organelle we're going to talk about is the one that provides all of the energy, or the powerhouse of the cell, as we sometimes call it, the mitochondria. And mitochondria are known as the powerhouse of the cell, or this energy-forming organelle, because they are where oxidative metabolism or respiration happens. And so there's a series of chemical reactions that we're going to get into next week called cellular respiration, and their job is to make ATP, or the energy molecule. And that making of ATP is why mitochondria are considered the powerhouses, because they make ATP for the cell to use, and ATP is the cell's energy currency. And so mitochondria power a lot of things. You can see a mitochondria here. It has this kind of distinct double membrane structure, and we're going to talk more about that when we talk about respiration as well. And finally, sometimes we think about all of these organelles floating around inside the cell, just doing whatever they want. But that's not actually the case. There is an internal framework of protein fibers, which you can see here in green inside of this cell. And that is called the cytoskeleton. Cyto is cell, and skeleton is kind of a support network, right? And so this is the cell skeleton. It's made up of protein, and it's one, able to provide some structure and shape for the cell. It's also able to hold the organelles in place. You can see this nucleus here in blue inside the cell. It's being held in place by the cytoskeleton. But one thing that's interesting about the cytoskeleton is it's constantly changing and moving, unlike our skeleton. You can imagine that'd be pretty bad if our bones were constantly degrading and then reforming in a different place. But in cells, this is actually advantageous because it provides a track or ways for things to move inside the cell. And so not only does the cytoskeleton provide some structure and support, but it also gives the molecules within the cell, particularly those vesicles that move from ER to Golgi and Golgi to outside, a track or a highway to move along. And so the cytoskeleton is actually pretty cool and generally forgotten about because we tend to think of cell as like a bag of liquid where things can float wherever they want. And that's actually not how it is. Okay. And so just to summarize the cell lecture, cells are the smallest living things. All organisms are made of cells, and all cells come from other cells or pre-existing cells. If you take these three things together, that's what's known as the cell theory. And cells are made up of a plasma membrane, which is a phospholipid bilayer that is selectively permeable to the external environment, lets some stuff in, lets some stuff out, and then a series of organelles or functional compartments inside that plasma membrane. And all of these organelles have specific functions that they perform, and without any of these organelles, a eukaryotic cell would likely suffer and not be able to survive.